The first thing we're looking at is a story I did called Camp Tamalpais. Tamalpais means sleeping maiden, and that was the name of our mountain in Mill Valley where I lived as a kid from ages 10 to 17. It's a story that contains very mean pictures of my mother and the girl and her mother and some of members of her family who lived down the street. I call my mother Igor. Her real name was Helen. I love this story because it's all about the evilness in a child's mind, and particularly sadistic little girls. I'm very proud of the little scenes of doll sadism and the sadism that little girls practice on each other, which I must say we learned from our mothers. I know there are some very good women cartoonists who do wonderful stories about their backgrounds, but in my case, my background from the very beginning was evil and twisted and fiendish, and this story still makes me laugh. I didn't have any formal education with my work. I always drew and painted what I wanted to. My mother tried to get me art lessons with a local artist. He told me to draw a still life. I said, I don't want to draw a still life. I'm not interested in doing apples and bottles. And he said, well, then get out. I did have an art teacher for a while until there was a conflagration. He wanted me to be the next Gustav Klimt. I just wanted to express myself. When I brought in my first comic strip to him, he said, get out. But at the end of the day, I got what I wanted, which was my personal freedom. I do not believe that anyone can be taught art. I believe that it's something that you do yourself. It is a personal language, which only you can develop. And once you've developed it enough, then other people can learn to speak it. It is not the job of the art teacher to erase your work. It is not the job of someone in an official capacity to tell you what your internal language is. Some things I did in school when I was still about 13. This was how I got back at people after they teased me all day, because I didn't know how to stand up for myself. So I've drawn Fran with very huge, ungainly hands because she was rather masculine and gawky looking, and I've emphasized her Adam's apple, which was very unkind of me. We've got a picture of a little girl who I called Ike Mo. I just remember that name floating around from somewhere. But it's how I saw myself as a child, rather unpleasant and hairy and out of control. My self-image and my art were always a part of each other. Sometimes I shaved my head. I think I was the first woman in San Francisco to shave her head. Men screamed when they saw me on the street. It was unusual. Most women artists only go as far as other people allow them to, taking an often ladylike position to their own humanity. I work to break out of the geisha-like shell into my own personhood, no matter how dark the facts may be. A sort of Persephone in my own underworld. Covers for my solo underground comic, Frescazizis, which is still illegal in Britain. I won't show you the most illegal parts of it. Oh, no, maybe I will. We'll see. Frescazizis was taken from when I worked in a TV news station, 4 guys and me in a tiny newsroom writing down the stories that came through during the day. One of them was about an Italian baker who had devised some obscene baked goods, and he'd put them in the window of his bakery on a Sunday, which was a huge shock to the Italian populace. The little sign saying Frescazizis, which means fresh cocks in Italian. The ladies on the cover, there's myself in the front, and my friend Molly, who was a dancer and had gone with Vaughan Baudet, a very famous cartoonist from our period. On the back cover is a picture of a very talented dipsomaniac named S. Clay Wilson, standing under the neon sign Prick's Cafe, which was actually Dick's Cafe, which was where we did most of our drinking. Next to him is sort of a take on Marlene Dietrich in Blonde Venus, where she dressed as an ape and then took off her ape costume to reveal this beautiful woman. This comic is still illegal in Britain. Maybe it was because it was done by a woman. In Debasement. I find this is a rather significant story. It's a pastiche of the well-known Story of O by Pauline Réaget, and it's rather relevant because we've got the newest sort of form of, I don't know what to call it, mummy porn done by the lady who did the book about quite a few shades of neutrals. This is a take of the first and more vigorous form of ladies in bondage, except this story is a twist. It's about men in bondage. There's a woman who's keeping a bunch of dangerous men in her basement, and I had a great deal of fun doing this story. And considering that the male underground cartoonists, who outnumbered us women by about 4-1, were outraged by this story, so that was a real coup for me, mainly because there's a rather incendiary scene towards the end of this story where there's a castration scene. The women went mad for it. The men were disturbed. Some of them didn't speak to me for quite a while. But I like the different characters. I like the fact that one of the men in bondage was a hairy biker and one of them was a sort of a pretty boy. And I just liked the projection of it being into a future where it's men who are endangered instead of women. Here we are at my favorite time of year with my favorite kind of celebration, Halloween. One of my favorite memories of a great party I gave where I invited all my cartoonist friends. I wallpapered the hallway with cheap butcher paper and put pens and pencils all along the floor. And after a few drinks and a few puffs, everybody got to work drawing on the walls like mad. And I had reams and reams of brilliant visual art from that party. It was a great success. Myself in the center, with hair and without. Down below, we have made-up characters except for the man in the right-hand corner saying "Zig Zig Mademoiselle," who was a very, very young Mark Caro, later on famous for his work in Delicatessen. Lovely, lovely party. I love Underground Heaven. It is one of my very favorite pieces. I've put in portraits of so many of the cartoonists that I loved. It was so much fun to draw, and it was a real push because it was an attempt to draw a metaphysical realm at a point when those kind of things weren't being done. I always wanted to be a portraitist. Well, we've got me and Dave Geiser, and we've got Robert Crumb, we've got Terry Richards, Ted Richards. The bottom panel there, we've got the inimicable S. Clay Wilson, Pat Moodian, who was an early pioneer in women's comics. The next page, close-up of Robert Crumb, a drawing I'm still very fond of. Dear Jim Osborne, who's not with us anymore. Me and Dave Geiser, who's gone on to be an artist in New York. I'm not sure what he's doing. Trina Robbins and Diane Newman. And then at some point, the drawing just fractures up into a very strange metaphysical creature. The basic story, just that everybody's at a party. Suddenly, there's a thing on the TV saying there's a nuclear alert. Everybody goes into a panic. What'll I do? What'll I do? And so each person goes into their own little private universe. There's Ron Turner in the left-hand corner. Jay Kinney looking above his spectacles and being a bit dubious, as Jay was wont to do. Bill Griffith, portrait there of his profile. And S. Clay Wilson again next to Gregor the monkey. In the next scene, we have the dreadful nuclear flash. It appears in a Church Street gay bar and continues on in a fractured way with a screaming Trina, and on to the next page with a lot of metaphysical frou-frou of one kind or another, and a little portrait of Maximilian Schell at the bottom there, just because I like his face. So we've still got Maximilian Schell in the left-hand corner there, but apparently some of the cartoonists are pupating, and some of them are turning into insects, and some of them are turning into poisonous fish. And Bill Griffith in a turtle shell talking to another turtle, and lo and behold, Victor Moscoso has turned into some kind of little beetle. And, is that a little profile of me? Well, I can't comment on that. And Trina Robbins is at the bottom, and she has become one of those talky baby dolls from the 1880s that just squeaked and rattled on and on and on. And here's lovely Jim Osborne as Dürer's self-portrait, the frustrated portrait artist in me, and the counterfeiter is at happy play here. We've got Greg Irons as a Japanese samurai. We've got Jay Kinney as St. George, killing the dragon. I like these three panels very much, and I might add very, very different from the usual Underground Comics work. As we see here, all hell has busted loose into a sort of a pop art, prototypical, slightly priapic universe of tumbling creatures and things. We've got a pair of twins with Bill Griffith's face, and not an awful lot of other people who are even distinguishable, but I just got into a pattern frenzy because I sort of do that and started to see things everywhere. But this kind of thing is very exciting for the brain to just kind of suddenly make semi-abstract yet distinct patterned objects out of nothing and just have them tumbling around. There isn't any real sense to this image. I just find it sort of visually mathematical blooming of sorts. It pleased me. Here we are in hell. And we've got flames, and we've got kinkajous, and we've got masks from Day of the Dead, and we've got Ronald Reagan in the center of things with Idi Amin there to the left. Basically, it was everything I could think of that might be roiling around in the flames. It's a wild and woolly ride full of cross-hatchings and madness, and all the little tiny cartoonists are right in the middle, being affected by the king of demons himself, Ronald Reagan. And here we have the denouement. I wake up from a terrible dream. My cat is terrified. I look to find my flatmate Rob, and he's wearing a gas mask, and actually reality turns out to be much more frightening than any dream could possibly be. The end. Public enemy. That was me. Me in the center, below our legal aid person. When I first came to England in 1984, one of the first things I got to experience was going to trial for obscenity. Knockabout Comics was being raided regularly by Margaret Thatcher's government, and on this occasion they had confiscated all copies of Frescozizi's. It had been for sale in a man's store whose name I cannot mention, but who is quite a massive entrepreneur, and his father was actually the judge at our trial, again, whose name I can't mention. And I've made light of it here. It appeared in Anarchy Comics, I think number 4. It was an upsetting experience to have to stand up and defend myself, and I had to think on the run, because I'd never been called into court over any of my American books. Public enemy. There was a little judge who had a little son who opened up a record store in London town. He carried comic books on a little wooden rack, and the vice squad popped the company who took a profit back. "No, I'll carry these." The little comic company got busted every year. The owners lived like garden gnomes, hiding out in fear. Their lady author came to court. The judge found her obscene. He read her comic front to back, behind a courtly screen. "What have you now to say, my dear, before I burn the lot?" The lady author looked around, then twitching, she stood up. "Define the word obscenity, Your Honor, for the court. Printed matter meant to turn our morals into sport. It took 10 years to live my book, based it on my strife. Rape victim, dancer, one-night stand, cartoonist, painter, wife. If my life seems obscene to you, it wasn't meant to be. I simply drew from what I knew, the men and women near to me. A typical assortment, rare and deviant beasts who hang around the clubs and bars, trading insults, pain, and yeasts. If truth is pornographic when depicted in the arts, don't blame the artist, blame the world. She's just observing facts." "Thank you for your testimony. I've listened carefully. I shall read your book again before I judge your plea." Her book was taken off the racks, all copies burned to grit. In Judgy's son's big record store, the men's sex books still sit. Lost Girls as a book is a bit of a freak, a bit of a strange animal. It's not a comic book. It's not fine art. It is drawing, but some say it's not even the pornography that we claim it to be. It's a strange animal that lives somewhere in the twilight zone. It took 16 years to draw, a lot of hard work every day. That was what I did for all those years. 20 monkeys with some crayons could have done it faster for sure, but every time I look at it, I'm very proud of it. Every line contains exactly the amount of color I wanted. Everything in it breathes properly when I hold it again. And I think it will probably take a long time before people can categorize it, because I believe it's in a category of its own. But I love it. And it was a huge, huge event in my life. These are 2 panels that didn't make it into the book for religious reasons. Part of the reason that it took me so long to illustrate Lost Girls was because of the layering techniques I used. I would lay out ink or watercolor in the background and then use 12 to 14 layers of colored pencils over the background to get a shimmering effect, and the shimmering effect would change with each layer and with each different color that I used. And sometimes I'd have to make charts so I could remember which colors I used, because they were just on instinct. And since color was an invisible character throughout the book, and I believe that color has a huge effect on people's emotions, it was very, very important that this be utilized absolutely, especially for skin tones. I listen to music always when I work, and that music affects me. And color is a music that you can use in silence, and if you use it effectively, it creates music in the mind's eye and ear. Every single moment that I used to do the book was important and added to it, and I think every moment of that labor was necessary to produce the kind of depth and the kind of emotion and the kind of humanity that I felt the book needed, so that it wasn't merely about sex, but it was about beingness and about humanness and about what it is to be alive and what it is to feel and what it is to be here on this physical plane and on the metaphysical plane and on the emotional plane and on the cosmic plane all at once.